Good evening, everyone. This is the Audit and Finance Subcommittee for Sweetwater Union High School District. It's 4 o'clock and this meeting is now called to order. My name is Paula Hall. I'm the chair of the committee, and I will call roll this time instead of popcorning so we can hopefully work through our introductions fairly quickly this evening. Once I pull them up, just a minute. Or maybe how about Carolina? Would you be able to call the roll, and then you'll just answer when your name is called, present or here, and that will be fine. So Carolina, would you mind calling the roll?
No, not at all. Trustee Hall, I'll be happy to call roll.
Right.
Trustee Segura?
Here.
Lisa Schmidt? Here. Dan Gutowski?
You have to unmute. I probably should have said unmute before you say present. Just so you know, we could call them and kind of designate who they are. Lisa Schmidt, for the record, and Daniel Gutowski are both on the committee as community members. So they're, part of our committee membership. Go ahead with district staff and then the outside external representatives that are here. Carolina.
Of course, absolutely. Dr. Moises Aguirre, our district superintendent.
Here.
Dr. Jenny Salkeld, our chief financial officer.
Here.
Ms. Daphne Enriquez, our internal auditor.
Good evening.
Mr. Gerardo Moreno, our other internal auditor.
Yeah, good evening.
And with us today from staff, we have Ms. Janea Quirk, our Chief Facilities and Operations Officer. She might be joining us a little bit late. I'll just move on to the next staff. Ms. Athena Quarles, our Debt Finance Manager.
Yeah.
Mr. Travis Enslow, our Financial Reporting Manager.
Here.
Mr. Donald Prince, our Purchasing Manager.
Here.
Ms. Elizabeth Reyes Velasquez, our Accounting Manager.
Here.
Ms. Deanne Visito. Deanne, I'm not sure if you're on. I do see you, our Clerk of the Board.
Hi, everyone.
And we also have, again, Mr. Omar De Leon, our Web and Video Services Specialist.
Here.
From our external audit team from Crow LLP, we have Kevin Smith.
Here.
I believe we have Elizabeth Sav as well.
Yes, here.
Is Charles Rabley with us?
Yes, I'm here as well.
And Tori, I apologize if I mispronounce your last name. Is it Jaquel?
Jockle, she will not be with us today.
She will not be with us. And I believe that is everybody, Trustee Hall.
Thank you very much, Carolina, for your support. Carolina, you can introduce yourself.
I'm Carolina Zimmerman. I'm the Executive Assistant to the Fiscal Services Department, and I'm also here to support the Audit Finance Subcommittee.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. So we'll call this meeting to order. Carolina, do we have any public comment?
No, we do not, Trustee Hall.
All right, thank you. Our first order of business last time, since we had 2 community members that were out, we did try to hold a vote for a new committee chair for this year, but we didn't have quorum, so we're going to do it again. And as our practice, it's the board members that are on the committee that would be the chair, one of the board members on the committee. And I think at our last board meeting, just for those of you that weren't here, Trustee Segura had nominated that I continue as the chair, and I accepted that. So I don't know if we need to rehold our nominations again. Are you still in that mindset, Trustee Segura?
Absolutely. I still support you as.
Thank you. And I accept that appointment. So is everyone in favor of that for me to continue through the remainder of this year as the chair of the Audit Finance Subcommittee?
Yes, I am.
All right.
I vote yes.
Wonderful meeting. You're a wonderful chair.
Okay, thank you. I think Mr. Gutowski has
Yes.
a comment.
No, yes.
Yes, you voted yes. And the only thing I would say about this is that I think on the calendar, our timelines that we've had for the last few years of our subcommittee, we have like 3 guiding timelines. One for the district, one that's just kind of outlines what the state requirement and federal requirements are as far as timing of audits and different compliance reviews that are calendared every year. We also have our own calendar for the activity of the subcommittee, and one of those calendar items was appointment or the chair, the annual appointment of the chair. And I would suggest that we bring the calendar back next time to modify it so that the chair is appointed in January of every year instead of July, because that's really the calendar work. You know, we start with the audit and the audit is brought in December to the full body of the Board of Trustees for acceptance in December. And we always have our organizational meetings in December where the different members of this committee and other subcommittees of the board are appointed by the board. So I would suggest that we, in the future, hold the nomination and vote for the chair of this subcommittee in January rather than July. One of the reasons, is there any question on that?
Oh, no, I just have a comment after you're done.
All right, go ahead.
Oh, just if there can also be succession planning, looking at the various challenges that Sweetwater has had historically, this chair position is quite pivotal and highly important to the Sweetwater Union High School District. And I think that merits some consideration of the board.
All right, you're speaking of not having like 2 very new members on the committee every year, but sort of a alternating type of membership from the board to this committee, as we're doing with I think the community members as well. We're trying to alternate when they're elected or appointed so that we can make sure that everybody isn't all new. So I think that is a good consideration for us to make to the board, and I will definitely bring that forward in my report. And I think everybody here understands that it is so important. We really appreciate everything that the committee has done, especially with our community members being on here and bringing another set of eyes to the district financial operations is really key. So I appreciate your suggestion, Mr. Gutowski. All right, so with that, I'll continue as chair through December. And the next item on our agenda is about the audits and an update from Crow. Dr. Sockeld, I'll turn the agenda over to you so you can help us work through the full agenda from here on. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Trustee Hall, and good evening or good afternoon, committee members. So we do have our periodic update with our members here from Crow. We've introduced them earlier today. So we've got our Kevin, Elizabeth, and Charles. I believe Kevin will be providing a high-level overview of where we're at because we are commencing our work here in this month of October. It's kind of now that we've closed the books for the year, we'll kind of continue with that next stage in the review process. And then we have Elizabeth, who's responsible with the district-wide financials, and then Charles with the bond-related financials and performance. So I think probably among the 3 of them, they will be providing the committee an update as to where they're at and then what's ahead over the course of the next few months. So I'll hand over to you, Kevin.
Thank you. And you're exactly right. I'm going to rely very heavily upon both Elizabeth and Charles to give whatever detailed level analysis you guys would like to have. But since we last talked, we have performed our interim procedures, which primarily relate to compliance, as well as gaining an understanding of any changes to the internal control structure. We noted no deficiencies at this point in time that would be required to be reported to you. Solid progress was made at that time. We are in the process of about to kick off our final field work. And I think what I want to stress most importantly to each of you is, one, we believe we are on track for the timeline that was communicated to you during our planning sessions. So we believe that we will be coming back to you in December with final issued financial statements, both financial statements, single audit or the grant compliance, as well as the bond audits. With that, I can turn it over to both Elizabeth and Charles to talk about any detailed information that you might have. And yes, my puppy just walked in and jumped in my lap, so I apologize for that. Wow.
I will echo on to Kevin's comments. So I'm leading the financial statement and district audit. I handle the state compliance portion as well as the federal compliance portion. And then Charles is overseeing, per the audit committee's request, is overseeing the Propo bond audit separately from myself. I don't really have a whole lot of detail because we haven't finished. And so when we do come back to you in December, we will have a more detailed view of any findings we may have, any recommendations that we may have from that process. But we have definitely been making some great progress and headway. We've been meeting with management periodically, going over new systems they've been implementing. One in particular that we just went over was Debt Book, their new debt management process, which has been very promising and encouraging, going through all the detail and time that they've put into that. So we're hopeful that you'll be pleased with the progress that you're going to hear about in December, but of course we are not done yet, so we can't give you anything concrete. One other thing I will mention is that if there was anything of concern, you would hear from us prior to today and December. So we completely understand our responsibility is to the audit committee and to the board. And so if there was anything that came up through this process, that was alarming in any way, we would not wait until December to bring that to you. So no news is good news when it comes to the audit process. Charles, did you have anything further you wanted to add for the bonds? I think that it's in a similar place as the district.
Yeah, no, we're in a similar state where we're going to be working on the bulk of the audit here shortly for the testing piece. So we've got a lot of substantive testing for compliance completed, and now we've got sort of our wrap-up phase with certain other aspects of compliance, and then the reporting. So where we compile together those deliverables that you see for the bond, for the Propo bond. So we'll get that to you at the December meeting.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee members for the auditors? I know that you guys went a little bit more detail last time at our last meeting in July, I think the end of July. And I really appreciate at that time you were saying that Kevin had said that you hadn't identified any material deficiencies. There was just simply the one deficiency that remains, and that was with our new system not having been implemented yet, but we're looking at that timeline. As a board, we're trying to really keep on top of that timeline to make sure we get updates as the progress is made by staff, and where there may be bumps in the road, so we're aware, because we think that is the key component to bring us really into a.
Camera's not working on the laptop either.
I think you're not muted, Mr. Moreno. So that's all right. So anyway, I really appreciate the work you're doing. And at the December meeting, you would also address any of the prior year findings that we had, and as either resolved or unresolved at this point in time. or at the time of your report, correct? Okay.
Correct. Yes. The majority of the findings that we had in prior year, we didn't have any compliance findings, which is really where most of our work has been over the last 6 months, has been focused on the state and federal compliance. So the testing that we'll be doing actually starting on Monday, the testing that we'll be working on starting next Monday is really focused around the details of your financials now that the books are closed, going through your cash reconciliations, going through the nitty gritty substantive testing of all the account balances. That's still about to be started.
Okay, so that could have an impact on any opinion that you would issue at the report in December, correct?
Correct.
So I see that Lisa has her hand raised. Go ahead, Ms. Schmidt.
Yes, and I'm sorry I missed the last meeting and if this was discussed about the external audit. Is this the time to, I guess, was this gone over in the last meeting, specifically the CalPERS pay schedule?
No, that wasn't this. This group is Crow. So we're talking about the Crow audit. The other external audits we'll address after we talk about the regular financial and Propo audits. The Propo has the 2 audits, the financial and the performance audits that are done, and then the regular financial audits is done. These are all done by Crow LLP, whose representatives are currently here. Kevin Smith's the managing partner. Elizabeth Sapp is heading up the group on the financial audit, and Charles is doing the Propo audits and performance audits. So that's what they're speaking of, and basically if you kind of want to highlight what you spoke about last time, Kevin, it would be you would catch the 2 community members up who haven't had a chance perhaps to listen to our last meeting recording, but go ahead.
I'd be happy to, and I will try to keep this at a very high level, but Lisa, any questions that you might have, would be happy to answer. So as external auditors, we're actually engaged by management with oversight from the audit committee, and we work directly for the audit committee. So unlike perhaps other entities where auditors are thrust upon you, we're actually engaged by the district to provide assurance upon a couple different things. One, your financial statements. So overarching Sweetwater Union's financial statements taken as a whole, as well as their federal and state grant, federal compliance, federal grant compliance, as well as state compliance. We also do a variety of bond performance audits. But really, we're engaged to provide a level of assurance to the readers of those financial statements or those compliance statements that they've been prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles or the underlying regulations related to compliance. We perform our audits in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards as well as government auditing standards. It requires us to come talk to you guys prior to the engagement, which we did back in July. We're providing kind of interim status check right now, letting you guys know that we're on track. And then we'll come back at final to issue our final opinions. I would anticipate unmodified opinions, but every audit stands upon their own. But we'll conduct those in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. If we note any findings, whether they be waived or booked adjustments to the financial statements or errors or non-compliance items, those would be communicated to you directly as an audit committee member during that time. So again, we work very closely with management throughout the year to provide this level of assurance, but we work directly for you. So any questions that you guys might have, happy to answer them, and hopefully this gave you a little more perspective as to who and what we're doing.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up question on that, Ms. Schmidt?
I do not.
No? Okay, thank you. I think we're really on track to hear more at our next audit subcommittee meeting. And as usual, we do have in our normal process, the chair, and last time I think it was the chair and Trustee Segura that met with the team the Crow team as separately from this committee in order to gain additional information and insight from the team as they were performing their audits and working through the various requirements of that work. So we really appreciate everything they're doing, and we expect to hear good things, but we definitely want to hear that whatever it comes out, you know, it's always a look back at where we've been, and we feel like we're on the breast of going really forward with all the different financial systems coming and the new HR system really coming into play and hopefully being fully implemented in the next few months. I think that will make a tremendous difference going forward, and we appreciate you being on board to look at that work as we move forward. So thank you. And that's all. Is there any questions, Mr. Segura? Do you have a question?
Yes, I think maybe it'd be if it was possible, we can get a especially our community representatives that are here, an update and maybe where we're at with the N4 implementation and just kind of where we're at right now, just so that while we're all here, we could understand it all together.
So do we need to have the auditors here? Do they have something to share on that work? Not really. They may advise occasionally what's happening or look at it, see if it's on track, but they're really not involved or engaged in the work of the N4 implementation. So I don't think that we would expect them to remain on the call for that. I'm trying to respect their time. Dr. Aguirre?
Thank you, Trustee Hall, and thank you, Trustee Segura. What I would recommend is we can put on the agenda for a future meeting, whether it's the Audit and Finance Subcommittee or of a board meeting. I can ask for Dr. Sawkill and Dr. Winters to prepare an update, status update, if you'd like. I don't know if we can get it on the agenda for next Monday, but definitely at the follow-up meeting, if that's a request. But I would strongly recommend that it be put on the agenda.
All right, yes, I think it definitely has to be an item we're watching. We have been watching it, and I think we've gotten Friday updates, which is a memo to the board that comes out on Fridays when the board makes special requests, or if there's information that the superintendent wishes to provide to the board of trustees. They do that in a Friday memo or Friday update where they provide those type of updates and information to the board. One of the recent ones we did get was on the N4 implementation timeline, but I think it would be really good if you could just briefly talk about it now. It would be good, but I don't think we need to have the auditors, the Crow team on the call for that. They're welcome to stay, but I was just trying to release them from being on the call and respect their time. So if that's all we have for the Crow team, I think you're welcome to go.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day.
Yes, have a great rest of the fall.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So as it relates to the audit and to our ongoing and completed audits, I think the next item in that in the external audits is actually a memo about the FCMAT AB 139 report and the findings for and our plan and what the status of our actions have been. In that, it's on this item, this attachment, which is part of the whole item we're on right now, the C, whatever it is, the C1, C2B, C2B. And so if in respect with that, if we go through this memo that was issued by the superintendent and Dr. Sawkill, back in July to the board. It provides a table of what the recommendations coming out of that FCMAT AB 139 report were back in 2018 or 19, and what the district has done to meet those recommendations. So if you want to go through that, Dr. Sockeld, and in that, I think we'll see what you can speak a little bit about the Infor implementation as well. As it's
yeah, so that document that we provided an update here, and then just most recently an update to the board. A lot of these items, whether it was process and how reports being brought forward to the board, trainings with the board associated around, like there was fraud trainings that were done, some of the work around our bond issuances, and as an example. A lot of these have been implemented, and we noted at the time too, you know, what was being addressed. But around the Infor specifically, we highlighted that the work was in progress at the time that we did this. We thought our implementation was going to be a lot sooner, but we've been working, as you can imagine, it's the HR component, the fully integrated system along with our IT team, and then also finance. We are looking to have that implemented in the spring. So that is one of the last remaining item to have addressed, and as part of the corrective action plan for the AB 139. So we are in that process of testing the system, both from HR and finance. We've spent the last year or plus years, almost now 2 years, designing it. So we're now going through what we call system integration testing, going through transactions and scripts and kind of making sure that a transaction for a requisition goes through okay, or a transaction for a journal entry goes through okay, that kind of thing. And then until we move on until the next phase, which is another testing phase. So when we work closely with the implementation partner, which is Infor, and so with their team, as we identify areas that need to be addressed, we continue to work with them into that next phase before we do go live. So then we got to look at conversions, looking at our data, uploading that and building it into the system, working on reports, things like that. So there's just different iterations in the process that we're working with them on that.
correct. And I thought at our last meeting, I thought we were asking for an update on this memo to include the timeline.
And I believe we provided a Friday update to the board about this, and along with Dr. Winters.
Right, but I was hoping that we'd have something for the subcommittee, and since we don't have it, now we're going to have to wait till our next meeting to get that information. But in the meantime, if it's not confidential information, could you send that Friday update information to our 2 community members so that they have it before our next meeting?
We can share that. I think it was a matter of just timing, yeah, the meetings
Right.
and everything, and went to the board.
Right. Yes, Dan?
One question on R1, on the chart that you ended up mentioning about, it's the fraud prevention training. Was the frequency of that training discussed, whether it's one time or ongoing for individuals? And if not, could that be taken into consideration either as a new onboarding training for individuals or just a general training that is offered by the district every 3 or 4 years or whatever frequency is determined?
I think that's something, I mean, Dr. Geary and I can review that. I mean, at that point, to address that request, was a training done in August with board members and with management at that point in time to address that point. But definitely we can work with Dr. Geary and our general counsel on that ongoing piece.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think it really is a great recommendation, Mr. Gutowski, to make, because as you know, I won't be on the board after December. I'm serving the end of my term. So it really is imperative that new members will have at least 3 new members this, well, no, because Mr. Solis, Trustee Solis will continue as, he's our president currently, and he ran without opposition. So he will continue on for another 4 years. And Mr. Segura, our Trustee Segura, has 2 years left on his after this December. So we have definitely got to think about the future and where this board needs, especially based on the experiences we've had over the past 4 years. So great recommendation. To pretty much have a calendar. I know that one of the recommendations we have annually is training on the Brown Act and ethics for the board, and I think it would behoove us to include fraud prevention in that training. And I also know that I've attended for the Dan McAllister, the county treasurer. He puts on every year a fraud prevention seminar, whatever. I've attended that. It's very good. It goes way beyond what a school district necessarily, but it definitely has a lot of the information that it provides a good overlook on what kind of responsibilities different people have within a system, including trustees or elected officials. So I think it'd be good for us to perhaps request some of that to be incorporated in our training as well. But so this one, basically on this particular item with the AB 139, most of it, if it says implemented ongoing, because the changes have been institutionalized and we're now, as a matter of process and procedure, including those into.
And that was over a year ago. So yes, our most recent update either emphasize, I mean, it was implemented and ongoing, like the practice has been put in place.
Right. And so the one about the fraud detection methods, such as risk assessments, in July, according to this table, it says partially complete. Are you on track to have that completed? It says estimated completion 3 to 6. That's R3 on the table on page 12, 2.
Right, and that was tying to, so we've got that fraud piece, and it ties to the work that our internal auditors are doing when they do their plan for the year. That's what ties in some of that risk assessments and analysis to the work.
So when it says there's an estimated completion, so once it's completed, is it going to be ongoing? Because it would seem that you'd have to have it ongoing.
Right, it's going to be ongoing because, and I think Daphne and Gerardo can speak to that, because when they put their plan together, which is a 2-year plan that addresses these points. So yes, that will be an ongoing work because of that constant evaluation of their plan that they bring forward to the committee.
Okay.
And so they cover specific areas that they address in the district operations with finance.
I think one of the concerns I would have when it comes to is when you have a significant changes in staff, how that relates to what your training is and when the timing of that training is, and how you make those, how you account for those things when you have a lot of changes in your staff, especially in management or in the fiscal house. You know, it just really seems to be a real need to make sure people are trained and have all the information, at least have it readily available and have a person to go to that can give them good direction on what to do. How is that working?
Please, from the finance side of things, I mean, that's management team that we have here. We always ensure that we highlight those checks and balances, but really it's about developing the systems and sharing that with them, whether it's the true course system, whether it's a process transaction, reporting transaction, making sure that we have the checks and balances for review. I think it's a lot of that communication, and sure, like I'll highlight like position control, how we track that from start to finish, any of the transactions with journal entries, making sure that those are reviewed, approved accordingly. So I think it's a lot of that transactional piece of us working through that with them.
So is there a cross training going on to ensure if somebody leaves the district, it doesn't leave a big gap in knowledge? How does that work?
A lot of the things we're working on right now, we were actually having conversations today with the staff when we look at job families. So let's say we look at accountants, right? Because we do have a couple of vacancies right now in accountants, how that is managed with the work amongst all of them, so they're familiar with it. Same thing with budget analysts, so that folks can step in into certain roles, that there's that training across the board. We were talking about that even with accounting technicians even today too. So it's important that that cross training happens not only when someone leaves, but someone can go on vacation, someone can be out sick, that kind of piece. So that way we can have that continuity in the operations. So that is something that myself and this management team have been working very closely with our staff.
All right, that's good to hear. So thank you for that. Are there any other questions on the table regarding the FIC MAC AB 139? Okay, so the next item in the external audits would have been the one that Ms. Schmidt had spoken to, which was the Purge Audit. And I know we talked about this last time, but if you wouldn't mind going through that again, Dr. Schockel, we'd appreciate it.
Sure, definitely. So there is a report in your packet. This is a very comprehensive report. The PERS had done a review of many districts up and down the state. What you see, that's why it's a significant size report, because it highlights every school district. But for Sweetwater specifically, and what they asked for the two findings was, one was the tracking of the longevity pay. And then two was going back to ratify salary schedules from, it was 2015-16 timeframe, which we brought forward to the board. And since then, anytime we bring forward a new job description or any change to pay scales, and we do this now even annually now as the practice, is we bring forward those salary schedules for board action. So that's been remedied as part of a course of our normal operations now to ensure that that's factored in. The part with the longevity pay is they made us look retroactively, and I think right benefit, it was 2016 of staff up to a certain point in time, and then wanted to look at prospectively. So it's a part working with payroll, with the retirement or any of the reporting that's been submitted so far to PERS. And then prospectively, it's our work with HR to ensure that the information is updated for staff going forward. And so it requires in both of these efforts, both with payroll and HR, a collaboration with our County Office of Education, because they're the ones that report on behalf of the district the retirement information. So we've had a lot of conversations with them to help us implement and put these items into place as a result of this report. And then we've also have periodic meetings with the reviewer from CalPERS to provide status updates as to where we're at. I want to say in the last month when we met, we had reviewed about a little over probably 30 files for employees, because it is pretty labor intensive. We do have a designated staff member that we brought on a short-term basis in payroll to help review some of these files. So we've been keeping the reviewer apprised of those developments with the payroll piece of it, and then also the HR. So we are addressing their corrective action plans, to address this item. And I know, Vanessa, you'd like to add anything else, if there's anything else to highlight.
Yeah, so they were asking from 2015-16 going forward. And more recently, they are kind of reviewing the retroactive changes and that needs to continue to be looked at or not. But for sure, the sample members need to be corrected retroactively. And yes, we are working with HR, waiting for an update from the county to make sure the prospective changes get done.
We have standing meetings already booked out through December with our reviewer, just to keep them updated as to where we're at.
Yes, Lisa, go ahead.
Do you have a time frame for when this would, I guess, be concluded, or have they given you a time frame, or?
That's a good question. They would actually like to have this resolved by December. I mean, that's kind of what their goal is, but that's why we're having these periodic check-ins monthly, so that way they can continue to have conversations there at PERS. Now that we've been giving them data sets, as Vanessa mentioned, they're reviewing that to kind of see how it does impact those that may have retired or kind of retired through the process. And then that might help expedite after they review the sample, what that might entail going forward. But they would like to have resolution hopefully by December. But if we keep at this pace, I want to say it's around 700 to 800 employees that have been impacted retroactively. So if we're at 30 a month, it's going to take us a little bit of time. So, and they know that. Again, we're very open with them. They have all the information. They know what it entails. And so that's why they're evaluating it to see if they can come up with a solution.
Right, and then the fiscal impact as well, I guess,
From our standpoint, right, Vanessa, it doesn't have an impact to the district as an employee from an employer standpoint. What they're evaluating is, does it impact any of those perhaps employees that have already retired, if there's any impact to their benefit, and it's their retirement benefit, and that's what they're evaluating.
And Dr. Sokeld, you did say at our last meeting that it would result in it wouldn't impact them in a negative for those employees that have an impact. It wouldn't be a negative to their benefit.
Correct, right, Vanessa? If anything, it would add to their benefit. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mr. Gutowski, you had a question?
It was answered in the process.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Do you have any more questions on that, Ms. Schmidt? No? All right. So we'll go on to the next item, which is, it's the general services, the 4 letters from the Department of General Services to Ms. Quirk.
Oh, yes, that's part of under the audits. Those are the school facility program audits. That's what the CROW team is also evaluating. So in addition to the district-wide and the bond financials, we have another subset requested by the Department of General Services, DGS, to look at those school facility program audits. And that's all part of the work with CROW. They've been pulling information on that, and they will include that in their final report.
So this this wouldn't necessarily be just Prop O projects, correct?
No, it's state school facility. It's a separate
Okay.
fund. It's our Fund 35.
What's hard for me, I'm sure for others, is to know what projects each one of these are for, because there might be multiple projects at a school site ongoing. So do you know what those different projects are?
They're very much, there's like, they have it by schools, like the Mar Vista Senior. They're looking at any of the funds that were received as associated to those projects. I'm not sure. I think Athena, you're on, right? Do you want to provide some context on those specific ones? And we've been working with Janae on that.
So you're looking for the specific projects of the SPL audits?
Yes.
Yes.
It's associated with the monies that they provided for those specific schools.
Give me just a moment, I can give you that. Don't know it off the top of my head. There's so many. Give me just a moment.
Do you have it by application number?
I can provide that, yes.
Well, no, they're on, I'm just looking at the the letters that were part of our board agenda items, and I was just, each letter has a different application number on it.
Mm-hmm.
So
and
that's
it's
why.
Associated with when we completed those projects at Mar Vista, let's say Mar Vista
Right.
High. Yeah, they review, and if there were any dollars that were issued based off of that application, they want to see the tracking of that activity. So if we applied for $1 million, they want to look at that detail.
So are you asking for the school projects or just the school names?
No, the school projects, the names are on the letters.
Yeah, so for Mar Vista High, as an example, that was related, I want to say were most of them the HVAC projects?
Yes.
Application.
So that is correct. So most of them were with the HVAC projects. Those were all part of one project.
But these are all, the application, is that the application number on this letter? I don't know if you have a copy of it. It's in our agenda packet.
I do.
And up in the corner, it says application number 57//68411-00-043. Is that the application you sent in to use the money, or is that the project number?
Originally, so let's say it was the HVAC, because most of them were the HVAC. So when we completed the project with HVAC, the facilities team, Janae's team, submitted an application to the DGS to ask for funds. And that they provided their match or their corresponding funds under that application. That was our original application after the project was completed.
That's correct.
Okay, so this is basically a reimbursement application.
To an extent. And then they ask, how we spent those dollars that we received back.
Because didn't we use Propo money for HVAC?
Yes.
And this is the eligible funds under that application that the state provides under a different funding source. And then those funds that come back go into Fund 25, separate and apart from the bond fund.
So they're going to reimburse us for a project that we paid for with Propo funds. And in some cases, maybe if it was not at that we would get a reimbursement for some of that we put into a fund that can be used for any of the schools.
Right. There's other, it's another capital project fund.
So how do we ensure that the schools that get that reimbursement aren't, how do we ensure that we're using that reimbursement fund equitably for our schools on the future projects? Dr. Aguirre?
Thank you, Trustee Hall. So that's part of the work that happens over in Ms. Quirk's areas, going through the rubric and identifying the needs of facilities. So it's part of the whole conversation. I just wanted to add, basically there's two methods that districts proceed with that state facilities funding. One is what you've described very aptly as almost like a reimbursement. The second one is to go ahead and submit the application and in essence wait until the state funds the project, which would have meant for us that we would have applied for it back when we did, and we would have been waiting on these funds to be allocated before we proceed. So we made the decision to proceed in order to be most expeditious, so that we would have the HVAC unit in place. But in essence, as long as it's eligible, those are the two main ways that the state proceeds. I just wanted to chime in on that. And then in terms of the equitable distribution, I think that's part of why we go through and do an analysis of our facilities and over in the facilities and operations side. But in essence, at that point, as long as it meets the eligibility requirements, the district does have a degree of discretion, which ultimately is part of the board's approval for projects.
Right, and it does take time for any project to get DSA approval before you can even break ground, right? Or
right.
So, I mean, it is a timely process. We've learned that. I mean, people keep asking me about different projects. Why isn't that done yet? Why can't they keep telling us, they're going to do this, and I know it takes a lot of time, and it's just part of the world we live in. But I thank you for the explanation. And if I don't want to hold us up from moving forward, I really appreciate the explanation. That helped me.
And this is why we changed our audit scope with our auditors, part of their engagement, because this happens from time to time. This isn't something we do annually. DGS periodically will issue requests to review each of these project funds.
Okay, but so when in our last meeting, you talked about a new requirement and it related to facilities funding.
It was this piece.
This was it, but you're saying this is periodic. It's not an annual requirement any longer because you may or may not have an application in. Okay,
right.
so
that's why we had to change our scope with Crow, because it's a very specific scope for this work here.
So if we have future applications that go in for reimbursing or accessing this money at the state level, will that automatically kick in them coming to with that requirement? Will it always be a requirement? It sounded to me like in our last meeting, like this was a new requirement that the state just began requiring. So that's where I'm getting a little confused.
It was a new requirement for the district. I mean, we have not as a district had this piece, so this was a new ask. And it's a new requirement compared to our engagement. Our engagement doesn't have this factored in because we don't know.
That part
And like you said, we could have other applications, but it may not be for another 5 years or something when they ask for that level of detail. So it's a new component and a requirement in the overall CROW audit.
Okay, so that's probably where I got a little confused because I remember Elizabeth talking about it being a new requirement.
Correct. Yeah, new requirement for them as a CROW audit team.
Okay, so, all right, well, that's it. Are there any other questions on the external audit pieces from our community members? Mr. Gutowski?
Not doctor yet.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that.
Not a problem. Prop DD. So there was no expenditure of funds. When just wondering, when are we anticipating potentially being able to sell bonds for those projects?
We just did last week. So $252 million, we were out the market last week. And so we got 3 times the subscription of that issuance. And we've got 2-notch upgrade with both Moody's and Fitch. So that helped us. Again, that resulted in the high level of subscription and also our interest rates there. And so the funds will be delivered on the 12th, so next week. And from there, our facilities team can, go put those projects into action with the ones that were listed there with many of our schools, including some stadiums and some renovations as well. And so the funds will be delivered. And so then a year from now, when we do the next audit for 22-23, then the auditors will be looking at that scope, not just Prop O, but also Measure DD, because it'll have the first series out of that issuance. And it's about half of the overall Measure DD authorization, because it's a little over $400 million is the authorization. So we went out for more than that, 252. Again, based on the AVs, based on different conditions and different parameters, but we were able to apply or kind of go out and solicit for those funds.
And Dr. Sacco, if I'm correct, it was part of both Prop O. There was a portion of that, and then Prop DD as well. So it was both.
Prop O was about 51 million or so, and then a little over 200 million for Measure DD.
That was good news.
It was.
That just shows you how far we've come. A long way, really, under the leadership of Dr. Sacco and Dr. Aguirre. We've really come a long way in our fiscal health. So it's really showing that, in just having those ratings increase like they were, improved, basically was really good news, and having that issuance go as well as it did was really amazing. So we are very appreciative of that. And I'm sure you can appreciate that too, Mr. Gutowski.
Yes, I can.
How much work that took. Yeah. All right. Are there any other questions before we move on to our next item? Oh, let me find my agenda. All right, so no more questions. Our next is about the financial reports. So, Dr. Sacco.
I'll have Carolina pull up. This is our unaudited actuals that we took to the board in mid-September. So it's the final results for our fiscal year 21-22. And it also played a significant part in, as we were talking about the bonds and our work with the rating agencies. I'm just going to highlight 2 slides from that presentation. The first is just kind of putting things into perspective, because a lot of what we did with our credit strategy was kind of focusing on the past, the present, and kind of in the future. And so you can see, again, when we look at where we've been, particularly in 17-18, that ending fund balance, to where we were at when we closed the books for June. So you can see that significant increase. Again, a lot of a result of putting processes in place, also a result that, one-time savings, that we've utilized. But along the way, we've used some of those one-time savings to pay off items such as our early retirement program. We paid off one of our qualified school academy bonds, that obligation. We're using some funds here too from this 116 as part of the transaction from last week with the bonds is to pay off the debt obligation that's associated with L Street. It's about $28 million. So again, we're utilizing these funds, and this is all credit positives with the rating agencies. And so I think this is just always a key slide when we close out the books of just highlighting year-over-year changes, but most importantly, the last few years. And then if we go to the next slide, the next slide is highlighting, if you go to the next one, is just our reporting cycle. So I think you're toggling over, Caroline, into the next one.
Yeah, let me try it again. Hold on, please. Yeah, is it going? I think it's still on the year over year.
This says comparative reporting.
Okay, now it's on there. Yep, it's on there. Okay, so this was here every reporting cycle that we have throughout the year, from adopted budget to our interims, kind of that side by side. So you can see like where we were at that second to last column on estimated actuals. We were anticipating, because we were looking at various encumbrances, adjustments that we have and things like that. It was 67 million. But as we looked at some of our one-time funds with restricted resources, as we look at our final numbers, we can see, okay, what can we address and maybe could be applied towards those federal or state one-time funds. And again, booking all of our year-end accruals, making sure everything is in, booking all of our revenues and things like that. We ended up more favorable from that 67 to the 116 million. Again, a lot of positive outcome from that. And again, these 2 slides went a long way with the work that we did with not only the rating agencies, but then we had meetings with investors. And this is what we put into our bond official statement, kind of disclosing this information. So this narrative was greatly, was well received by the financial markets and a lot of our stakeholders. Again, just highlighting that work, and then that leads into, that becomes our basis, then this 116 million, how we open up the next fiscal year. So it'll be rolled into our work for 22-23. And that's what we then also hand over to our external auditors that you met with earlier today, and all of this information where our ending results are at. So they have all of our standardized account code structure reports, the data files, and all the work that they've been now pulling samples from on this actual activity.
Do you have any questions? Go ahead.
No questions, but a barrel full of kudos for the very good work. It's also very interesting when you dive into like Fund 11 and Fund 13, smaller funds. There was a lot of really good work that was done within adult education and also the cafeteria fund. That's just showing it's only 6.5 million between those two, but for being smaller departments and being able to have 6.5 million a part of that 116, just kudos to the whole team and the good management that I'm seeing.
I appreciate you mentioning that. That is one other item that was a credit positive to our rating agencies as an example, because we spotlighted how those 2 funds are no longer reliant on the general fund, that they are self-sustained in the operations with their revenues and expenditures. Because yes, many years ago they were relying $2 million or so each one contribution. So there no longer has that reliance on general fund, not only from an operating standpoint, but also from a cash flow perspective. Many years ago, there was reliance on interfund borrowing to make those cash payments and obligations. And so now each one is managing their operations independent of the general fund. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, do you have any other questions or comments about the financial presentation?
I just wanted to add kudos to everyone, and I just like the trend of the balance, and also, you know, with state revenue being as it is this year, and probably not as you know, possible deficit, that's good to have the balance what it is. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? One of the things we're very grateful that we had the revenue to really establish the positive balances in our unrestricted fund. It's definitely been a long road, but one that I think we've really established an operational expectations now within our district under this leadership that will sustain the district in a positive way, so we won't have to face all that negative criticisms that have really been really hit us for many years, even before we were elected as a board. I think this work will keep us in a positive mindset and positive, but it takes everyone working together to do that, to make sure that we understand why we have to operate the way we do, and at times with caution, proceed with caution. But we've also asked the superintendent to ensure that we're looking at serving the kids who are present within the year, not, so that we're not just building up balances, but we're actually utilizing the funds as best we can, putting the teachers and staff in place before the school starts so that they are really having those robust services that will ensure success across our district. It's been a real challenge with staffing, so that's probably in part why these balances really came about, in part, but not all, because I think really it is district's leadership that made this happen. So Dr. Gary, you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Trustee Hall. So yeah, I just wanted to really appreciate the work of the whole district in this area. And as we've been able to strategically identify those investments from the state and federal dollars, our focus really has been on restoring some of the services that were reduced given the past kind of context, but really to be prudent with the use of these revenues, as Trustee Hall indicated, during this time where the students have needs now, our staff has needs now, but also being cognizant that at the state level things are constantly in flux, and last year was very flush, and this year looks like there's already a couple of months that have come in below the projections. So for us to have the ability to weather any potential storm, that's why we're making those decisions to restore where possible, but also being just really prudent in terms of those investments, to kind of find that balance or that equilibrium amongst the different layers of need, and putting in some checks and balances from a staffing perspective to make sure we're asking the right questions, I think is really important. So thank you for that.
Go ahead, Mr. Gutowski.
I know one of the things that I was always amazed with Sweetwater is there was never any reserves. And I know we have kind of a little windfall from this year. And if the board needs to consider anything where we need to set aside potentially some reserves from this. Not all, but some. But it gives us a great little point in order to take that into consideration. My second comment is, I know we talked about management. I want to thank all those workers that were there in the cafeteria and adult education and in the classrooms, maintenance. It's like Dr. Aguirre said, it's the whole team, and I want to echo that to the frontline staff and teachers.
Definitely.
And Trustee Hall, to Mr. Katowski's point, I can have Claudia, or sorry, Carolina, move to slide number 10. Carolina, if you can go there, because that highlights our reserve. And this was just from unaudited actuals. Yeah, I think that one, yes. So you can see, Mr. Katowski, how we have our reserves. We actually split it out with committed, non-spendable, and assigned. Committed requires the board action. One component was our LCAP, so that was a new requirement for this year. But you can see 20 million was committed back in June for that L Street kind of, or that debt payoff, and then the other 8 million is below and assigned. And then we also have a reserve for declining enrollment, and we also have some contingencies that you can see and assigned above the state requirement of the 2%. So working with Dr. Aguirre and the board, where we have that kind of structure and strategy around those areas, and kind of being mindful of, kind of future changes or things like that. So that's why we've got that earmarked.
Excellent. Thank you for pointing that out.
Right, and the fact that we already paid off some huge debts that were on our plate, and a plan to pay off L Street is really key. Those are things we inherited, and for the most part, not all the early retirement we did, but the L Street was really done way before us, and that was a huge kind of millstone, I guess, around the neck of the district, and seeing that really come to be at a place where we can really take that debt off the table will be tremendous, a tremendous boost to the district. And I think a confirmation that the board has really done a lot of good work along the way, made some really sound decisions in the that ultimately benefited the district. So that's all for that, and I really appreciate everything you guys have said.
Trustee
so, yes,
yeah,
Trustee Segura.
I'm just gonna comment real fast. I just want to say I truly appreciate the comments from the committee members, and they're really right around. They're saying what we're doing, and I'm glad that they're bringing it up, and that we could show them what we're doing and how we're how the reserves are a priority now that we have some, and just that was mentioned by Lisa, the possible less revenues from the state, our potential, you never know, but we got to be prepared for all that so that we can take advantage of the finances that we have, and I think the board truly appreciates that, the team here truly appreciates that, and the community really appreciates that, because it's very important. It's fundamental, obviously, for everything we do, so that we can provide the best education to our students. So that's all I wanted to say, Trustee Hall. Thank you.
Well said. I totally agree. I thank the committee members as well for bringing that forward. All right, the next item on the agenda will be internal audit items. So I believe that we turn it over to the internal auditors, Daphne Enriquez and Gerardo Moreno.
Yes, good evening. Let me just get my notes pulled up here. So this evening we have 4 agenda items to walk you through. The first is internal audits ongoing and completed. There's no significant changes from the last one that was presented in July. The first section of this is for audits. There's a few that we have in progress. The second section that begins on page 3 is for non-audit services. These are procedures that internal audit performs that is agreed on with management. And page 4 includes an appendix listing all of the reports that have been issued in the current and prior fiscal year. Those that are highlighted in gray were presented in prior meetings. Scroll down to that table. Since the last meeting, there is a summary letter to share for the work that was performed for the district's commercial warrants. If you refer to the bottom of the ongoing and completed document, there are page numbers in the footer. Page 16, I believe, is where that summary begins. There were a couple other reports issued, but they're not included with the current agenda items as we're still waiting on corrective action plans for those. So it's likely that those will be available to share in the December meeting. In the first quarter of the current fiscal year, most of our tasks have been around the non-audit engagements related to the ASBs. That included reviewing year-end financial statement packets and the work related to the spend down plans. For the latter, at the beginning of September, each of the school sites were notified if it was determined their ASB should submit a spend down plan based on balances as of and for the year that just ended, so June 30th, 2022, and we expect to share those spend down plans in the December meeting as well.
Is that it?
That's it for the ongoing and completed. Yeah.
Okay, I have some questions, but would do any of the other members have questions around that?
I do. For
Mr.
the
Gutowski, go ahead.
Yes, for the warranties. From if I read it correctly, then purchasing is going to be holding the warranties. Was that correct? Or not the warrant? Yeah, the warranties for everything.
The purchasing department will work with purchasing and accounting. So the warrants actually come from the accounting department.
Okay, so it's an operational question. So if facilities had a question regarding a piece of equipment or something that was, bond related, a roof, how would they be able to access the warranties? And
are you talking about like the warranty on an item, on a capital item that was purchased for the district, not warrants, which are commercial warrants?
Well, I guess I need an understanding of what the commercial warrants are, the 10,000 commercial warrants.
So those are essentially the checks that are issued by the district to pay invoices.
Not
right.
a problem. Okay.
So they're not payroll warrants. I know some districts call them B warrants, other districts call them, they're different series from payroll usually.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's what these warrants are about, and that's what the report is that we're focusing on. I know that guarantee or warranties related to the purchase of equipment and other things has always been one of the focuses under the Propo subcommittee. They were always wanting to see how those things were managed and really accessed to make sure that people would know how long a product was guaranteed or had a warranty or some sort of, if anything went wrong, what happened and when the replacement of that item would be needed to be done, and managing that way. And we can address that probably in another meeting, but at this time we're talking about the commercial warrants for vendors to the district.
Thank you for the clarification regarding that. Yeah, no questions.
No, okay. Well, I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Obviously, the memo you have here, Daphne, is very good. It's about the commercial warrants and about your engagement with that. And I appreciate that and the recommendations that you have. I was kind of a little dismayed that there was such a high percentage of warrants. That, I mean, it doesn't seem like it's that much, only 16%, but to me it's a lot when you say that you recommended management to change the account code structure on 16 out of the 16 of the warrants that you audited, because they were either not correctly coded to the right cost center or the function, which is really key, especially when it comes to meeting the requirements of certain resources, especially the categorical type of resources, where you have to demonstrate that you're spending a certain percentage for parent involvement or for direct services versus administration, those kinds of things. It's really key. But I assume that, how did management address that? Or you haven't got a response on that yet?
Well, if I may clarify, and I believe this is on, if we refer to the footer of this, it's page 12. Am I correct with that, Trustee Hall?
Well, I don't know that one. It doesn't really print at the bottom. It wasn't
Okay.
printed out. So it's item D on your memo.
So I believe it's 9D on page 5 of the actual letter, and it's page 12 of the agenda item. But for clarification, the 16% or the 0.16% that you see there is actually less than 1%, and it's, I guess, the way that the percentage is presented. But it was only 16 out of 9,786 warrants, so that really comes down to less than 1%.
Right. So, but aside from that, I mean, I get it. It's not as big of a deal, which I kind of meant at the beginning, but when you see these, what happens? You're making a recommendation to who? And what is the response that you get?
Well, we usually work with fiscal services when we come across something that we believe should be have a different account code structure. And so we make a recommendation to fiscal services. And if they agree with that, and most times they do, then they have one of the finance staff make that change. And then they provide us with documentation just to confirm that that change was made.
So is that change made through a journal voucher to move the expense to the appropriate code?
Yes.
Okay.
And if I could add to Trustee Hall, so a lot of this, if it's a requisition that was initiated at a school site, so then we also loop in that school or however, so that way they are aware of what we made a correction about. So that way when the next time they submit a requisition or any other transaction, they're aware of those changes to be to mitigate that going forward and repeating that same issue.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because it is it's a learning moment, a teachable moment, but it is so important to code things properly because all the reporting, and when people ask if it's coded right, it's easy to pull out of the system how much different things are being supported by and what the expenses are. But when it's not coded, it can throw things off. But the other question I had was about the item 9D or 9E, where 50% of the commercial warrants, well, it's 0.5%, I guess. The warrant packet was held for an additional information. So it was incorrect documentation, the invoice, or it was inadequate. And what happens when you have that happen?
So time to time, for an example, we may have an invoice that doesn't agree to the vendor information. So we'll just follow up with accounting to ask if there's a different invoice they may have. Sometimes it's an extra invoice or an invoice just correctly included with the packet, or there may be a missing invoice. So we just follow up with accounting and we're given the missing or the correct information and the packet's updated.
Okay, so on the next page, under your recommendations, the first recommendation you have is to formalize a purchase transaction for all, to include comments that provide a brief and concise description of the purpose of the expenditures. So that is not being done already?
There are instances we come across, and we're not checking every single purchase order. We actually only do that for the extended procedures that are described for the one-time funding resources, or if we determine it may be necessary to refer to the purchase order, then we may do that. But there are instances we may come across a purchase order that does not have comments or detail as to what it is. And in those instances, if we need more information, we will also follow up with accounting or fiscal services for that additional information. But if that purchase order detail is absent of that, we pretty much determine whether the expenditure is reasonable based on the account code structure. And usually that's adequate for us to make that determination.
So can you tell me who inputs the requisition? The requisition is electronic. It's a soft copy, electronically generated requisition.
It depends on where, yes, it depends on where that requisition is initiated from. At a school site, for example, it may be the administrative assistant or the principal secretary that may enter that. So it's done through the district's business system, TrueCourse. And I'm not sure exactly which module they go in, but it's, I think, routed to our purchasing department.
Okay.
After all the approvals, yeah. So it initiates, let's say, a school site or a department goes through the approval process, and once it's gone through that and the budget check, it goes to purchasing to source the purchase order.
And then it creates this purchase order through their work, right? So is that going to, I get the recommendation makes sense to me, so that you have a record all the way through at each step of what the purpose and the item is. It's basically, is that a training? That seems to be a training to make sure that the people doing that work are trained to input it in a certain way or provide those explanations within the system so that they can do it, and following back up to make sure that they operate that way. Are you training people to do that as recommended?
The internal audit team has not provided training. We usually make the recommendation to the district to facilitate or to provide that training, but we are certainly available as an advisory resource to participate in those trainings.
Okay.
And Hall, what I can add here is we work very closely because a lot of these here, particularly on these descriptions, are around our state and federal funds, particularly the one-time monies we have with state right now and the federal. And so we ask for specific references to, let's say, their SIPSA, their site student plan for student achievement, so that way they can cross-reference to that. And then let's say it's ESSER 2 or ESSER 3 monies, what is it specifically geared towards based on all the different criteria. So that's when we're talking about trainings, our state and federal office does a lot of trainings with our principals and their secretaries and highlights these type of items as an example to ensure that there's enough information.
That makes sense. And that seems like a good way to provide the documentation and the purpose on it. And do the auditors have access to those documents like the SIPSA and all those things so that they have the ability to double check what's going? I mean, I don't know if that's part of their audit or not, but
so we do perform just limited procedures versus this being an audit, but at any time there is a request for information or whether it be considered necessary to review a document such as that, it's always provided.
So, Dr. Stockhill, the recommendations from the Office of Internal Audit on this letter regarding this warrant, the commercial warrant audit that they did, do you find those that you will support those recommendations? Okay.
Yeah, we've been in conversation with the internal audit team, and again, wherever we can take these recommendations and operationalize that into the work we're doing, we've been addressing that with them.
Yeah, I would strongly support that. It looks like pretty good. There was one item that in the list, and I can't remember which one it was, where you had the auditor was unable to determine from the purchase order or supporting documents if expenditures were reasonable. I don't know how that. So I guess they follow up with the department when that happens. And it does make sense that a manager would need to be able, would need to ensure that they're looking at things when they're not just rubber stamping approvals, but I don't think, but there was one thing in here where it talked about the county and their, when they do an audit. I can't remember where it was exactly.
That may be in the introduction of this report, which is on page 2, or in the header of this agenda item, it'll be page 7. Oh, I'm sorry, you don't have access to see that. But it'll be page 2. And Mr. Gutowski, this is a good area to refer to on that process as well, since there was some questions about that earlier. But it may be about the 3rd paragraph down.
Well, I thought it was actually one of the items that,
So I'm sorry, Carolina, that would be page 9 of the agenda item. It'll be further below.
I can't see her
There
screen.
we go.
So I'm not able to see Carolina's screen.
Okay. Well, this portion of the introduction just goes over some background on how at one point the district was fiscally independent, but during fiscal year 18-19, that status was changed to fiscally accountable, and that was effective July 1st of 2019.
No, that wasn't
be
the
it?
part I'm talking about. No,
Okay.
it's not. It's on page 7 of the letter. And it says, in addition to the internal audit's recalculation of invoices, you had done some recalculation to match the invoices to the warrant and the warrant register.
Oh, yes, I see.
And then it says all warrants forwarded to the county were deemed to be properly calculated due to the district's fiscally accountable status. Warrants are subject to the county's audit process. It is internal audit's understanding also through discussion with management that the county process did not identify exceptions between warrant amounts and invoices. So my question was, does that mean they're not checking the product, the documentation that generates the invoice?
I can respond to that one, Daphne. Yeah,
Right.
Trustee Hall, they do review. They look at, there's a whole nother, it's another layer on top of what our internal team does. So before a check, because they ultimately release the warrant, right? We provide them, and then if it has to pass all their tests before they release it back to the district.
Okay, so they are
get
performing detailed audits, right?
Yeah, they're looking at invoices. They look at contracts. I know Don's on now too. I mean, they look at contracts. They look at our board items. So they want to make sure everything is lined up.
That was my understanding. I just wanted to make sure that it was okay.
Yeah.
We spoke about it, so I appreciate that. And I appreciate the work being done here. Is there any questions from anywhere else? Anyone else on the committee about the internal audit?
Vice President Halls. So
go ahead, Trustee.
Thank you. So I was looking at, I had looked at page, what is it, 14 of 19, and item or note 10 or number 10, and I thought that was very important in regards to our COVID relief funds and making sure that we're in line with how they're supposed to be spent in a reasonable manner. And because I think that could potentially, that's a lot of the money we have, and I think really trying to keep a handle on that is really critical to what we're doing, so that we're not, we don't have any issues, or very limited amount of issues, if any. That's all I wanted to mention.
What page were you on?
I was looking at, so I'm looking at the pages I'm looking at. It says it's 14 of 19, but it's actually page 7. But then it says page 14 below it.
Okay, let me find it. Yeah, see, I can't.
So it is page 7 of the actual summary letter. It's item number 10 that begins with
okay,
effective.
Yes. Yes,
Thank
I
you.
see it now. Thank you. It was just under what I was just talking about. So it's the
Yes.
next item on the list. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so if we're ready to
Okay.
move on to the next item.
Wait, I
I'm
wanted to
sorry.
ask
Okay.
you one question, because define what reasonable is when you're looking as an internal auditor. What to you deems a reasonable expense? You said, because it says the documentation if expenditures were reasonable. So what does that mean?
Well, for example, if we come across an invoice, we take a look at what items were purchased and we compare that to the account code structure. In particular, it may be the object. There's an object code that describes the type of expenditure. So if we come across an invoice for textbooks and it's charged to the object for textbooks or supplies, and that may be deemed reasonable. So we're just judgmentally determining based on the invoice and the description of the items and comparing that to the account code structure.
So on the on that item that Trustee Segura was just speaking of, it says that the auditor was unable to determine from the purchase order if expenditures were reasonable.
Yes, so for that, those were instances when we had to refer to the purchase order because we do that for all of these COVID-19 relief funds. So we referred to the purchase order and they were absent of those details. So we had to follow up with state and federal programs to inquire how that purchase aligned to the guidance from the California Department of Education for eligible uses of those funds.
So in doing that, did you resolve this issue?
We did.
Okay, so it's resolved.
Yes.
So I wanted to make
So
sure.
the procedures involved with that is once they provide us with how that purchase was in line with the eligible uses, we forward information to our purchasing department to update that purchase order.
Okay, so you go to the originator of the requisition.
Well, we usually
Or who-
follow up with state and federal programs, the director there,
Okay.
and she will often follow up with who submitted the requisition.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So are you going to talk about the 2-year internal audit plan now?
Well, that's actually included for reference. It's something that we presented in the prior year. So we're in the second
Right.
year of that plan. And I wanted to.
I have something to ask about that
Okay.
plan. And I apologize. I meant to bring it up at our last meeting and I didn't. And that was about under the on the table on page 4, the very first item on page 4, and I'm looking how it's numbered, the actual, it says fiscal services journal entries, evaluate internal control process, review and evaluate journal entries, fiscal year. But last time it was being postponed, it seems like, the audit for the journal entries. So
Yes.
Are you going to conduct it? Because I feel that that's very important to do, no matter if we have a new system yet or not, but especially to make sure that the journal entries that are recorded currently in the TrueCourse system are audited and really found to be valid, in good standing before we convert, and then doing it again once the conversion to the new system occurs to ensure that information is valid and we're not doing junk in, junk out type thing, So have you changed that internal audit plan to conduct a journal entry or journal voucher review this year?
Not in this year. Our understanding is that Fiscal Services has a corrective action plan currently in place with the external auditor. So there's a lot of work being done between the district and the CRO team. And rather than duplicate any efforts, we're waiting for those corrective actions to be implemented so that we can perform an audit on the newly implemented internal controls once the enforced system's in place. I guess at this point, we won't be able to add value and let the district know anything other than what they already know, which has been communicated or brought to their attention by the CRO team.
Okay, all right. Then there was one other thing I was going to ask about, and I forget. Shoot. Oh, it was in your audit work done, and it was about the, I meant to ask last time too, but I forgot, or I didn't really understand the right question to ask, was about the ASB. It was under all the ASB reports that you did.
Okay.
And you had one that was regarding the Booster Club, I believe at Olympian or one of the schools, one of the high schools. And you were not able to do that work because you couldn't access the information from the Booster Club. So what has happened since that determination? Have you followed up at all on that?
We are actually having a follow-up meeting with Dr. Aguirre and the site next Wednesday. So we should have more information in the next meeting.
Okay, great. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. All right. So go ahead. I'll give it back to you. Those were my questions for you at this time.
And if it would help to go back to what was discussed earlier about the risk assessment, we do provide some context for how we develop our 2-year work plan based on a risk assessment. So if we can refer to page 2 of that work plan. Not sure if it's available to pull up on the screen. But this talks about or walks you through how we determine high risk or potentially high risk areas of the district. And then we identify potential risk factors such as what prior audit results there may have been, or the frequency of prior audits, or the likelihood of different risk factors. And based on that, we utilize a risk assessment scale using low, medium, or high. And so we just identify or assign that risk or a type of risk or level of risk to each of the identified auditable areas. And that's how we develop our work plan.
All right. Thank you for that explanation.
And I think our next item would be regarding the ASB manual.
Okay.
So we're also sharing with you today a draft update of the ASB procedures manual. And as our internal audit work plan describes, we review the manual annually for any possible updates, and if considered necessary, we provide fiscal services with recommendations. During our review, we also reach out to ASB advisors and administrators, as well as ASB accounting technicians for input. So our third internal audit agenda item lists the key changes and the pages you can refer to for those. And agenda item 4 is the actual draft ASB manual. So some of those key changes, and we left most of them in red in the manual. So if you refer to those pages, they'll stand out. Disappeared. So let me go back to that. So we just added additional guidance we considered necessary, such as guidance on parent volunteers, virtual meetings, what ASBs can do when there's events that are canceled and refunds need to be issued, further defining gifts of public funds. We also added guidance for contest awards and student groups. There were also changes to the monthly financial statement packets due to a change in the accounting platform that's used. We switched from Blue Bear, which has been used historically, to something new called ASB Works. So we updated the manual on what's now required for the packets and electronic signatures that could be used. We also have a frequently asked question section.
It's a great, it really is a great comprehensive manual. I appreciate the work that you guys did with the original manual, and I appreciate the updates that you've done. Do you have any questions? Mr. Kitowski, I thought I saw you raise your hand.
Yes, very, very good work on this manual. And I know that a lot of the things that we have dealt with in the Audit and Finance Subcommittee have been from the associated student accounts. And so I'm hoping this provides a lot more clarity and will reduce some of the challenges that we've had with them. The only thing that I have is just a formatting thing. Parent volunteers on page 10 should actually go to page 11. There's just acronyms that are that are mentioned in the school connected organizations. Then it'll just flow better if you just.
Okay, thank you for mentioning that. We'll take another look.
Okay.
And I believe that's about it. So once, if there's no other feedback, after this meeting, it'll be implemented as administrative regulation and distributed electronically to the ASBs and available for download on the district's website.
So don't these go to the Board of Trustees? Will the manual go to the Board of Trustees, or simply being approved here? Is the action enough? I wasn't sure about that.
I believe, and Dr. Salakeld, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the ASB manual is just implemented as administrative regulation, so it just goes through cabinet.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, it's the list of fundraisers that we have to approve once, right?
Correct.
Okay.
That's the next item. Correct.
Right. All right. So is everybody in agreement that they're in, they approve this? I think that's what Daphne was referring to, and I think we're all good with it, right? Thank you for your work. I really appreciate it. All right. So next item.
And yes, Trustee Hall, as you were mentioning earlier, the one that we do bring forward to the committee for review and then to the board for action is a list of fundraisers and expenditures. And we like to bring this to you annually. We do reach out to our school APs or ASB advisors and then other staff. This is also reviewed with our general counsel. So at this point, there are no changes because we would have highlighted that if there were, would it be in yellow if there were any changes? So it's status quo. But again, we like to bring it forward to the committee and the board to make sure that we have our annual review process. And then the last page highlights the times we've been bringing it forward.
Right. I really appreciate that. I think making that an annual, task is really good because it keeps us always mindful about it. So yes. Has everyone had a chance to review the list? Do you have any questions? I see Lisa, go ahead.
Not a question necessarily, and this is probably not the right time. I was going to mention the last item, but I know a lot of these are cash. These are all done on a cash basis, but is there, I guess, some type of looking forward, looking in the future about using other apps or Venmo or other types of methods of payment for these, and I guess controls for that as well. Just, I guess, more of a comment.
No, it's actually a good question. If I may, Trustee Hall, that's something actually Daphne mentioned earlier in her discussion about a new accounting system that we've implemented for the schools called ASB Works. They do have some credit card functionality. And so we're in the process looking at kind of developing procedures and processes so we have that infrastructure in place. And then we're going to be looking at rolling out that ability to do that we've been receiving a lot of questions over the last few years to have that enhancement. And so we are looking to that.
It might, increase the fundraising activities since most people don't have cash anymore. Yep, thank you.
Thank you for that, Lisa. All right, So we have, we're all in agreement that the fundraising list will be fine, correct? Everybody just nod your head. Thumbs up will work. All right, thank you. We'll go to the next item then. Just, I believe it's our minutes, right? All right, so we have the 2 months because it turns out we didn't have a quorum at our last meeting, so we do need to approve, just as we did, we reapproved my appointment as the chair. We need to approve the minutes from February and July. Well, July is the first time we're approving it, but I believe we had the February minutes at our last meeting, so do you have any changes or questions on any of the items? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from both meetings.
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Thank you. So all approved? Say yay.
Yay.
Yay. Okay, great. So that's approved, and I believe that's it. Oh,
I'll abstain. I was not present.
that's correct. So now we have a time for the committee comments and a recap of recommendations to the board. So aside from recommending the fundraisers, we also had a recommendation about the transition plan for our members of the committee and training for the board and other staff regarding fraud, etc. I'll give you all a chance to make final comments now, or tell me if I need to put something else on the list. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Paula, for the recap. You did, accurately reflect from my memory everything, and I thank everyone for the opportunity, to once again serve on this committee and contribute to the Sweetwater and what we offer to the community, which is a good education.
Yes. We really appreciate your expertise on the committee, both of you, both of our committee community members. Really, we value the work you do in your own work experiences and what you bring to the table for us here. So very much appreciate that. Lisa, did you have a final comment?
I'm just very pleased since I started and learning myself. And how much hard work everyone does, for the betterment of our students. And so I'm just very thankful to be able to serve, and thank you, Chair, for patience with the learning curve that I've had. So thank you.
It's a lot to wrap your head around. Trustee Segura?
Yeah,
final comment?
I'll just echo your remarks, Vice President Paul, and I just appreciate the work everybody's been doing and to get us to where we're at today, and it's truly valued and appreciated. Thank you. And I think all the things that you had listed, recap was what I had as well. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, everyone, we hope you have a good evening and a good week, and we respect your time and call this meeting adjourned at 5:48 p.m. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.